kind of a first installment in a everything you really need to know video, summary kind of video, summary of everything you need to know. So this will be the first draft, we'll call it. So anyway, all right, the universe. Here we go. This is it. This is an explanation of the whole game. All right, there's no God. There's no intelligent creator. That's made obvious by the absence of an intelligent creation. There's chaos and noise and rubbish and crap. It's obvious. Really doesn't need to be argued. The force is that, you know, all the forces that we can detect in nature are crude and simplistic. The matter, all right, however it's generated, whether it could be one big bang, could be 10 zillion big bangs, could be big bangs for infinity. This could be the only universe ever created. That's the other alternative. They're really equally logical. We don't know the truth there. We won't know it, I don't think. But regardless, it could be either way, and it really doesn't matter, because we're here now, and we have to deal with that. All right, but anyway, matter. It's crude forces. That's all that governs the whole thing. You know, that certain capabilities, that certain configurations of energy take on, and they have certain abilities and inabilities. But it's really pretty simple. Okay, so the Big Bang, everything smashes out, little tiny bits, little constituents, quantum of energy, and it just starts to consolidate. Okay, it condenses, you know, just kind of groups together, and that's what happens over time. Then it's through that process it can create compounds and you know, made of these elements that are defined, that have a certain rules that govern what can be created. But regardless, so you get these complex compounds over time, billions of years. And then eventually we hit this thing called a reproducing cell, a life form. Bang. Okay, so now you got something really interesting, really different. Because to be reproducing, it obviously has to have a blueprint on how to do the reproducing thing. And that's that DNA molecule. And so now we have something new. It seems it would be impossible for something to be perfect in its recreation of itself, not to be capable of being broken. So it seems the idea of evolution by natural selection, and maybe a better word would be environmental selection. It doesn't matter. The point is, it is environment that does the selecting. The environment that the molecule, the complex molecule that is this reproducing cell, finds itself in, configuration of molecules. But regardless. All right, so you go from matter to this new thing called life. Okay, now all of a sudden there's new rules. Because this life thing will feed. It will consume matter, and then it will produce copies of itself. And that's the game. And it must feed to do that. It must, you know, collect the parts and construct a new copy, and so it goes on this evolution thing, but it has capacities too through time. This blueprint gets more and more sophisticated through this natural environmental selection process, and this organism, this biology, this piece of biology now we'll call it, will acquire new features. And eventually it acquired this feature, this capacity to retain personal experience, to learn. I would argue that's when consciousness was born. So now we have this whole new game, because these biological organisms are now not just through stagnant, hard programming interacting with their world. They're interacting with it based on a capacity to learn and a capacity to differentiate based on experience and how they interact, and most importantly based on this ambiguous thing called a feeling that is generated in them through programming, nonetheless, but it's a different kind of program than the programming that reacts to it and creates a behavior. So now the chain of logic that's dictating how this organism behaves is getting more and more complicated, because now we have essentially brains, even though it's a one central nervous system, we have different intelligences that are negotiating the end result behavior of the organism based on its environmental circumstances. So basically it's the creation of something very vital, very important by most people's commonsensical understanding of this feeling idea, this idea of being harmed and being pleased and pleasured. So this creates basically creates a psychology, programming that's unique for each individual, because now we have not only our native drives, which the DNA molecule has built into it because they are conducive to this thing called survival, which is important in the design of the biology. The reproducing organisms will obviously, dominate those that don't reproduce. And the ones that are going to reproduce are the ones that are going to be psychologically built to do that effectively and better than the competition. And there is competition. So anyway, moving on. So we are basically bacteria with brains now. We're a DNA molecule that has an ambition to reproduce and little else by environmental selection. But then we have this subtle conditioning that's also built into us, where our drives and desires can now acquire a nuance of preference and prejudice to even further refine our programming, make us more adaptable to our environment. All right, so I guess the next stage in life now then is this idea, though, of intelligence, of acquiring a real understanding, a conceptual intelligence. And that's where we go not just from, so where we have matter, we have life, we have this idea of consciousness, and now we have intelligence. And intelligence is basically the capacity to understand, to model the universe, to create rational tools. Now we can use our intelligence merely to scheme, merely to allow the conditioning and the DNA to more effectively engineer ways of reproducing, of making our individual DNA dominate. But there's nothing preventing us, because of the size of this intelligence, the capacity of it, to abstractly think, to think outside of that narrow box of individual desire, drive, what we've been programmed to do with it. We can extend that programming to something bigger and bolder. All right, so now the game is basically about ideas, and what our ambitions can be to engineer solutions to bigger problems. We can observe the world, and we can understand simple concepts, that us is the same as thems, that there's no difference between qualitatively our individual consciousness, and there's no real difference between the value of a satisfied organism, whether it be me or you or somebody else. It's the same deal. And so now we can understand concepts like fairness, and that's probably the next evolution, is in this intelligence thing, is evolving a definition of what fairness is, what the right thing to do is, what solutions are, defining the problem. So for me, the game is simple in terms of the politics. There's the easy solutions to most problems. It's just engineering. It's just making the systems work. So if we apply our intelligence, we can make it work. We can engineer it to do what it needs to do, as long as we understand the value, what is valuable. And most people are going to do that defining, unfortunately, still through crude aspects of their psychology, through their native desires, drives, and ambitions that nature imposes, and through the subtleties of their conditioning, their individual conditioning, their maturation into the world, and they're not going to take it any further. So I guess there's not much talking to them, but if you have some shred of intelligence, you will be able to figure this out, that you're basically an addict. You're just addicted to life. by the very nature of it. It wants you addicted. It wants you to do certain things, okay? The biology wants you to do things, and it makes you do them by creating in you desire and want. That's just the way it works. But we don't have to be tools to those crude forces and their agenda. We can be better than that, and we can understand that this isn't a free addiction. We don't live free. There's a price that has to be paid for existing. Every time somebody has a baby, they take a risk. They risk that they're going to create something that will live a horrible life. And you know, we can't walk away from that consequence. Something that there's real, every time you eat another animal, you obviously have to put some animal in a circumstance to make that efficient for you. And so there's a price to be paid for this thing called life. We don't live it free.
Every minute.